It's The Rock Show with me, Neil Jones. Joining me on the end of the line, we're speaking to the Manic Street Preachers and to James Dean Bradfield. How are you, sir?
Not too bad, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks for sparing us the time. Talking about the new album, Postcards from a Young Man. I have to say, it doesn't seem that long ago that we were enjoying the last album. I think it was May 2009 for the Journal for Plague Lovers. Was it a quick process, therefore, to put this one together?
I think the process of actually writing the album was quickened up by the fact that when we were working on Journal for Plague Lovers, Nick wasn't having to write. Nicky in the band, the main, the lyricist, wasn't having to write any lyrics during that period, because when we were recording Journal for Plague Lovers, obviously all the lyrics were already written by Richey, because they were lyrics that he had left behind before his disappearance. So all the way through the recording of that record, Nick was writing lyrics for this album. So by the time we'd finished Journal for Plague Lovers, we'd already started writing this album, because there was a traffic jam of lyrics waiting when we'd finished Journal for Plague Lovers. So I think we've just, since Send Away the Tigers, we can't stop, recording. We can't stop making records. And I think we felt, we've kind of since after 2005, we've kind of fallen in love with being in the band again, which is kind of strange for blokes our age, I suppose. That's the way it's gone. And
it's a kind of unashamedly pop-orientated album, isn't it? Because, as you mentioned, with the lyrics on the last album from Richey, a little bit of a darker album. But this one, on your website, it says one last shot at mass communication. Is that really much, very much the kind of thought behind this one?
Well, kind of steady on there with that kind of unashamedly pop thing. I'd like to think it's a bit more classic rock than that. But I think, the kind of, before we actually started writing all the songs for this record, Nick had given me a mission statement with that phrase on it: one last shot of mass communication. Communication. Sorry, I can't even say things anymore. And I think what he was trying to impart with that is that in this day and age where people are constantly talking about music in terms of the state of the record industry or digital platforms or new marketing models, I think we wanted to be about the music again, because we came from a generation where God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols was as resonant for us as Guernica by Pablo Picasso, or or Let It Be by the Beatles was as emotionally resonant for us as a great book by John Paul Sartre or something. Music had a massive part in the cultural landscape, and it's kind of being downsized and downgraded as an art form by people being obsessed about the record industry itself. We thought, well, we don't want to talk about those things. We actually just want music to matter as much to people as it did to us when we were young teenagers, and I think that's what we were actually driving at with our statement.
The last time I saw you live, James, I don't think actually was a Manic Street Preachers gig. I think you actually joined Duff McKagan on stage with his Loaded band.
Oh, Bradfield, you were there.
Yeah, and obviously he's now returned the favour, and he appears on the album alongside people like John Cale and Ian McCulloch. The Manics have never been one of those bands that have a huge amount of guests on the album, but 3 on one album. What was the any reason behind that on this one?
Yeah, no, when you're doing your 10th album, which is kind of a rare event in itself, really, when you're doing your 10th album, you've got to make a decision, whether you go down the reinvention kind of route or whether you go down the celebration route. And we went for the celebration route. Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the most groundbreaking record of all time, but I think it's a celebratory album in a strange kind of way, if you can ever use that word in conjunction with us. I just think once we decided to go down, celebrate what the band does best, I think we just wanted some people to join us on the record in that kind of mini celebration, really. And I know it sounds slightly narcissistic trying to celebrate what's best about your own band, but hey, we're just a bit silly sometimes. We're a bit daft. But it was as simple as that, and it was kind of scary asking these people, because they are genuine heroes of ours, and I thought I was going to start having flashbacks to the school disco where girls were turning you down for dances and stuff. But all the people we have said yes, which was amazing in itself, really.
And you've always been a big Guns N' Roses fan. I know you've covered Guns in your live sets before, haven't you?
Yeah, right at the start. When the band was starting, we were always covering It So Easy, because I think back then, It's So Easy on Appetite for Destruction seemed as close as you could get to that kind of nihilistic kind of punk shot that the Pistols used to give you. There was something about that. It so easy illustrates why early Guns N' Roses was so good.
Yeah.
It's because they weren't just a metal band; they were a rock and roll band with a punk edge as well. If Guns N' Roses hadn't had that punk, nihilistic and rock and roll influence, they wouldn't have. Well, half of their excitement wouldn't have been there, obviously. So we used to cover that song all the time, even though it has some questionable lines in it. And it's kind of, and playing it on stage with Duff McKagan was a real moment for me. It really was. So kind of, yeah, I just love the way it starts with that kind of like that Pistols kind of bass note intro.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the artwork for the album. You've always done iconic artwork, but you've got a picture of Tim Roth on the album sleeve. Was this a picture that already existed that you thought would work perfectly for the album?
Yeah, it is. I mean, kind of, Nicky in the band has got like an extensive collection of old magazines in his bedroom. Actually, in his office, not his bedroom. I don't think his wife would put up with that. And you go in there, and there are kind of year by year, and kind of like year by year kind of organized piles of kind of like pictures and magazines. Old magazines like Jammin', Melody Maker, Sounds, Select. All these magazines that are not around anymore. And he's constantly going through them just to find pictures to stick up on the studio wall. But he brought that picture in one day when we were halfway through the halfway through recording of the album. And as soon as he brought it in, I just knew kind of that he was right, that there was something about that picture that's just kind of suited the album, really.
And I mean, the album's been getting great reviews as well. I mean, I noticed some of the kind of sound bites are on your website, but do you actually pay much attention to what the critics think, or is it just done for your sakes only?
No, we still pay attention to reviews. We do. I mean, kind of, I grew up with the press. Myself, Nick and Richey and Sean, especially, myself and Nick, when we were very young, we grew up with the music press meaning an enormous amount to us, because we were living back in the South Wales valleys, and a lot of the records that we were reading about, we couldn't buy for a long time. And so kind of, when you actually kind of like read these reviews of records in The Enemy and Sounds and Melody Maker, you would actually build a picture up of the music before you heard it. Yeah, and so that's why the record press was so important to us when we were young age. It told us about music that we knew we wanted to hear, and it actually informed us about the music before we heard it. And it was, so kind of, we've always read the press, really voraciously, and therefore, if a good review matters to you, a bad review's got to matter to you too. You can't just enjoy the good reviews. You've kind of got to try and take some kind of reality from some of the bad reviews as well.
Definitely. Well, listen, we need to wrap up. You're on your way to our city in Cambridge on the 1st of November. If you could do me a favour, we've been playing the single to death. Why don't we go for an album track? If you can do me the honour of picking an album track, and we'll give it a spin on air right now.
Can you play Postcards from a Young Man?
We'll play the title track then, Postcards from a Young Man. It's an awesome album from the Manic Street Preachers. James, thanks very much for speaking to us this morning.